We sit around and we talk about these things and we want to give this false equivalence to Democrats and Republicans. That is not where we are right now. Republicans are doing something that is very dangerous to our society. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that as Americans. We must acknowledge that as journalists, because if we don't, we're not doing our jobs. We cannot sit here and pretend like, well, Republicans, cut them a break. We want to hear whatever. They have a lot to answer for in this moment. A lot to answer for what happened with the former president of the United States, why they allowed his antics to go on for so long, why he is not accountable, why they go along with it and don't say anything. They've got to answer for that. Why they are, whether you agree with abortion rights or not, why they have taken back a right that was that was granted to American women for 50 years. They have to answer for those questions. If they come here on CNN, they must answer for that. If they go on MSNBC, they must answer for that. If they go on ABC, they must answer for that. And they cannot expect to be coddled when they go on to a news organization or if they step in front of a crowd of supporters. And so...
Yes, Republicans are so coddled when they step in front of a news organization. Ryan, what's your reaction to that clip?
I mean, it seems like common sense, right? Like a news organization is not supposed to coddle newsmakers when they have them on their program.
Absolutely not. But Republicans aren't coddled by the news media.
No, certainly not by CNN or MSNBC. I'm not sure what he's talking about there. Like, is there some history of CNN coddling Republicans when they come on? Or does he mean he wants to yell at Rick Santorum? Or Rick Santorum's not a contributor anymore, is he?
No, I don't think so. But it's like this media fantasy of what actually happens. And what's really irritating to me about what Don Lemon just said is that he's not just talking about Republican lawmakers, he's also talking about Republican voters. He's talking about people who voted for Donald Trump. And it's one thing if you're just talking about politicians, but we know that's not the case because we have that clip of Don Lemon giggling along with Rick Wilson when he was mocking the accents of Trump voters, and I forget who else was on that segment. It was just grotesque, but it was sort of a perfect moment that crystallized where the media stands on this. And so what Don Lemon is doing is something that's really important because when he says we are not operating on two equal planes here, right? Like the Republican Party is doing something so dangerous that we can't do both sides equivalency in journalism. Well, actually, here's why that is still extremely important if you have this pretense of neutrality as CNN anchor Don Lemon does. He's not a host, he's an anchor. If you still want to have the pretense of neutrality, you have to acknowledge that on the right, they see, for instance, the pro-choice left as doing something that is way beyond moral equivalency. They see having a witness sit in front of Senator Hawley and say that men can get pregnant and then put that ideology into policies in the school system as something that is, quote, so dangerous, to take Don Lemon's term, that it doesn't have an equivalency. So it's to say that we must reevaluate our standards of neutrality to do X, Y, and Z, it goes both ways. But Don Lemon, as somebody who is neutral, who purports to have this sense of neutrality, only wants to do it in one direction. And you and I, Ryan, come down on these issues on different sides openly. We say what we think. We don't pretend to just be reading dry copy as though it is the voice of God and necessarily the truth. But he does. And that's why I think what he says is so incredibly dangerous.
It's an interesting point about that witness. That's so. On the one hand, I'm tempted to say this is a Berkeley. I'm pretty sure it was a Berkeley professor that
Berkeley law professor. Yeah.
Berkeley law professor. And on the one hand, that's a Berkeley law professor. That's not the president. That's not the Senate. But on the other hand, she does stand in for a kind of rising segment of the Democratic Party when it comes to the culture fights. But when it comes to that kind of material fights that the Sanders wing, the Elizabeth Warren wing, really rose in the 2010s, pushing for it. They've been marginalized to the extent that the squad has the squad has, which followed on from Sanders, also been, effectively marginalized. And I think part of that is that CNN, MSNBC, the kind of left of center media apparatus really rallied behind the kind of Clinton wing, the centrist wing of the party, while incorporating the kind of cultural critique that Hillary Clinton used to kind of combat the Sanders wing. Whereas on the right, something different is happening. And once the Tea Party rose in 2010, Fox News and the conservative ecosystem very much followed suit and then led that kind of Tea Party revolution, which then evolved into the Trump, and which now evolving into Trumpism, and has annihilated what was left of the kind of traditional GOP. And so I think the traditional Democratic Party is holding on to power a lot more effectively than the traditional GOP, which does mean that there's something different going on in the two sides. But I take your point about the cultural question on the left.
Yeah, but and I think what you just said is actually the perfect segue into what's underlying all of this, because the reason there was a shift in the conservative media ecosystem, the Republican ecosystem around the years of the Tea Party is because there were smart people who realized, for cynical reasons in some cases, that the Tea Party was not about limited government. The Tea Party was about people culturally feeling, as that Obama quote from, what was it, 2007 or 2008, that they were being looked down on for, quote, clinging to their guns, their gods, and their religion. I'm paraphrasing it. That stuff was becoming very visceral, and Charles Murray sort of documented what was happening and coming apart, and put the social science behind things that people were feeling in this sort of hazy sense. But it was acutely noticed that as we started sorting along these sort of socioeconomic lines into the super zips that you can talk about, and into areas that are disenfranchised, that don't have the same level of social capital, that when that hit with the Tea Party and then continued into the Trump years, it was because people felt like they were being looked down on and lied to, and frankly they were. And whether the political outcome of that is healthy is a different question. But Don Lemon is creating more of it. When you say things like this, you alienate people who have been alienated by you and the corporation you work for decades. And so for him to wax sanctimoniously about democracy and healing the country is like repulsive, because he sat and laughed when they were mocking Trump voters as toothless, rude idiots, and dehumanizing them. So I just have absolutely no patience for this from Don Lemon. It's completely disgusting.
And my understanding of that Tea Party backlash is that Obama's election, a black president, was really central to it. But I'm curious how much of a role you think that played, because and for a decade leading into that, you kept seeing people talking about how a majority of the country is going to be non-white in X year. And so then you have a black president, and then you have the Tea Party, and I think that kind of also fits with what you were saying, that this feeling of people that were losing some sense of the country. What role do you think that just the existence of Obama played?
Yeah, I wouldn't deny that some part of it was racial, although I think that part of it was overstated, and we learned that in 2016 when so many of the white working class voters who supported Barack Obama in the Rust Belt then voted for Donald Trump, and that actually was a pretty decent chunk of the electorate. In fact, a chunk that would have been big enough to swing what was a very, very, very close popular vote and then into the Electoral College. So I don't deny that played a role, but I think also, especially now, if you're looking at like Mayra Flores' election down in the Rio Grande Valley, if you talk to her and if you talk to her voters, they probably would say something really similar, that what they recognize in most of our major institutions that are run not by economic leftists, but by cultural leftists, they would say they feel alienated. And they don't like, for instance, being called Latinx. They don't like, being at a school where they're having these locker room battles where they might want a very compassionate, nuanced policy, but they don't want to be told that what they see and know with their own two eyes is wrong, because that feels Orwellian. So it's very hard to take this seriously from CNN, even though I have all of these concerns. Actually, we discussed this in an earlier block, and this fits perfectly with it. All of these concerns we talked about in your radar about the way I think Republicans have played with fire in talking about what happened in 2020. It is very difficult for the incentives of Republican politicians because they don't want to look like they're on the side of the media that does dehumanize their constituents and their voters, and even their own constituents and voters, people who would have voted Democrat, that are now, shifting because things have just gotten to such an awful boiling point.
Yeah, and they're leaving us no shortage of things to talk about. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Well, don't forget to
stick around, and we'll have more of it soon, no doubt.
That's for sure. That is for sure. Well, don't forget on that note to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're also available wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, Ryan.
Everybody have a great weekend. See you next week.
Happy Rising Fridays. Have a great weekend, everyone.